That's exactly why you can't have regulation controlling private sector and saying don't make more profits. And that's exactly the problem in 1936 onwards up to 1981 in the United States. They were allowing private banks and asking them not to make profits. It looked contradictory, and then somehow, if you say Reagan allowed it, the context was there. He allowed them to do this. Unregulated, self-regulation, they're too big, let them do whatever they like. Such a situation arises. Therefore, any move to that privatize and weaken the position of public sector banks is the biggest threat. And therefore, in fact, the person who is credited for stable banking in the face of 2008 crisis is Reddy. He has gone on record, I quote, he has gone on record saying that we have escaped the crisis not because of our regulation, but because of our, let's say, strength. And I quote this: stability was a byproduct of dominance of public sector in banking, not a product of regulation of financial sector. That you cannot regulate, that is history, if you don't have in banking sector, if you don't have dominance presence of, let's say, public sector. It is time that nature of governance and incentive frameworks in public sector banks do not encourage excessive risk-taking, which obviously means excessive profit-making. He also cautions against privatization of banks and observes that the major private banks now in India are operating as incorporated in India, but predominantly owned by the foreign capital. It's a part of globalization, capital entry. And the future also is in those. Even behind this microfinance, there is a huge, they're just waiting to pump in. They have already pumped in some areas. He is apprehensive about new banking licenses to private sector. He goes on to add, the underlying reasons for nationalizing banks of 1969 have not entirely lost their relevance even now. And what were the 1969 underlying? I quote, that some of you have written in the history. I quote this passage of the then Prime Minister in 1969 said, an institution such as banking system, which touches and should touch the lives of millions, has to necessarily to be inspired by a larger social purpose and has to subserve national priorities and objectives. That is why there has been a widespread demand that major banks should not be merely socially controlled, but also publicly owned. And this is the kind of a thing which is relevant even today. I hope you are the ones who are heading this kind of, let's say, understanding, hopefully. And then I think that you will have a role to play in at least safeguarding this kind of a trust that society has put in you. Thank you very much.